How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you. Today, I'm joined by a physiotherapist working within the NHS as well as within the gym environment. I hope I'm going to pronounce his surname correctly. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Alex Kraszewski. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on this morning. I'm looking forward to see what we dive into and where we end up.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the topics, obviously, that I sent over. I think there's a lot to sort of chat about, which will be good. But yeah, how have you been? What have you been up to in this last crazy madness year?
Yeah. As you mentioned, I have a full-time role within the NHS where I work as a team lead physio, and then my sort of other time is occupied in the private sector for probably sort of 20 to 30 hours a month of kind of general population work. And I tend to work with quite a lot of sort of strength sport athletes and barbell athletes as well. So given that the majority of my own kind of clients have not been able to access the gym for the last year or so, there's been less of that. But within the NHS, really, it's just been working where we needed. So our physio service did close down for some time, and we were redeployed into other roles. But I think we are starting to come out the other side of it now, which is nice, and then we can get back to doing what we do best.
Yeah, definitely. And because I know we've got a physio down at the gym that I work at, and they've been able to do some in-person sort of, this year, if you like. Have you still been able to do or got back into doing some in-person physio, or how was the transition to maybe doing some online stuff? How have you found that?
Yeah, so from the second lockdown, we've been able to continue running a physiotherapy service out of the gym I work at, which has been a huge help for obviously a lot of people that need to be seen in person. I think what I've found with some of the sort of remote and online work is that there is a cohort of people that you can manage very effectively when you've got a predominantly kind of advice and education driven problem or session that you're trying to deliver, and even when if you've got someone who's well coached, then it's easy to work through that remotely. But one of the challenges I've certainly found is a lot of my kind of a lot of my original practice is very kind of hands-on with people as I'm going through kind of assessing, treating, and even with coaching, and having to learn how to do that purely through visual demonstration through a screen, or picking the correct words that resonate with the person you're working with has been a huge learning curve. So although my preference is always to work with people in person, and typically we have people travel fairly far and wide to come and see us in person, which is great. I think the way that this remote care has almost been rushed through and become a lot more acceptable to people has made everyone across the world a lot more accessible, which is fantastic for people who want to work with very specific individuals who typically have put kind of content or messages out that resonate with them. So if distance is a problem, then really that's kind of mitigated by being able to do something remotely.
Yeah, definitely. I do agree with you there as well. It has been a learning curve. I know for me, the bulk of my coaching is done in person. I do have online clients, but that's mainly they're sending training footage over, review the training footage, send it back. But to then have, trying out sort of online PT sessions and that sort of stuff, it is quite, it has been something different because it is more about you can't put them in the right position and say, right, sometimes I feel that, yeah, it should be a setting where you can put your hands through the computer and say, no, this is what we're going to do. But yeah, definitely in terms of being able to reach a wider audience, and with distance being an issue, it's definitely been, I think there has been some definitely an improvement in terms of being able to reach different people with different expertise, which has been good. So obviously I did a little bit of an introduction at the start, but for everyone listening who might not know your background, how you got involved in the private sector in gyms as well as the NHS, do you just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
So I originally qualified with an undergraduate degree in exercise science, and then I got to the end of that and couldn't really see a tangible career path at the time that was really of interesting to me. And I think physio was the thing I'd looked at previously but hadn't really given a second thought. And the nice thing certainly in the UK is with a prior undergraduate degree you can go in to do like a master's level pre-registration physiotherapy degree, so it's a 2-year rather than a 3-year course. And at that point in time I thought, right, I'll go in and do that. So I qualified in 2012. So I think I'm in my 9th year of practice now. Worked for a sort of a national company prior to moving into the NHS about 6.5 years ago, and have worked my way sort of through the ranks there. And probably for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing my own work for myself alongside that, because I think working in the NHS and it being this kind of public health sector, and it's free at the point of access, you do have a number of challenges and constraints that you have to work with that impact on the quality of care that you can provide. And certainly some of the private work that I do is almost born out of frustration that I can't do everything that I feel I want to do to really help someone. So for the work I do with myself, it's probably not dissimilar in terms of what I try to do with people, but in terms of how long I can work with someone, in terms of how often I can see someone, it's a lot easier to do everything that's necessary, because having these sort of longer appointments where I can work with someone for an hour or even longer if I want to, you can get through everything that you need to. And again, it removes those time pressures where you're trying to prioritize everything for everyone that you see. And if you're working with like an injured barbell sport athlete as an example, often these people have been carrying things for a long time, and they've worked around it, and they've got their own perception of what's going on in your head. And you've got to take the time to listen to everything that's gone on. You've then got to take the time to go through a thorough assessment. You've then got to take the time to program everything and discuss the intervention, and you can't do that in half an hour. But when you've got the time and space to be able to do that, you ultimately you don't see people that many times, because the time you do spend together is high quality, it's efficient when you do it, and then really you're just guided by how that person responds and where they go as time goes on.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a big thing that I've had a lot of clients who have had niggles or injuries that is a little bit outside of my sort of like scope of knowledge, and it is sometimes that it is just the quality of time spent with there. And sometimes it's not always the area that's hurt that's painful. It could be something else that has been missed further up the chain or down. So I completely agree. Being able to have that a little bit more time, you can, maybe cover all the bases, or, go down an avenue that you think, right, we're gonna give this a go, rather than, being a little bit more maybe generic, if you like, and hitting the big rocks and thinking, right, this is what we're going to aim for. Obviously, the topics that I sent over, and being in, sort of both camps. It would be quite interesting. And as well, I sent the email over from seeing the work of obviously Tony Gentlecore and a couple of others, and then seeing the work that you're putting out there as well. For that field of training, working with people who are actually training and involved in strength training, I think is quite interesting. And I kind of wanted to touch on what's your kind of definition of rehab, coming back from an injury, and how have you found being in the in the gym environment and the NHS environment? What are people's actual thoughts of what they're expecting rehab to be, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I think I try and conceptualize rehab as this process of the restoration of whether it's tissue injury or this sensitivity to pain in a given context, at the same time maintaining and progressing the fitness or training qualities that are unaffected by that particular injury. And I think typically when people do talk about rehab or what they perceive it to be, is you've got these very kind of abstract exercises that typically have low load. It's difficult to draw a confident line from what you're doing there and the terminal goal that this, or terminal outcome that this person has. So you've got people who will default to their kind of their external rotation exercises if they've got a shoulder problem, or they'll go and do a host of core exercises for their back problem. And it's challenging because there are times where that approach is correct, but you've got to make it relevant and specific for the person in front of you, and that's really underpinned by a thorough and an appropriate assessment for that individual. So I think that the main difference I see between the work I do in the NHS and the work I do for myself in the private sector is certainly in my own work, I will see people who are habitually more active. They tend to be a bit more health seeking and looking after themselves a little bit more. And again, obviously working with a fairly specific population with, powerlifters, strongmen, bodybuilders, and things like that. That they are people who have very clear goals and very clear outcomes of what they want to do. So although, as with most people, their goal is to get out of pain and to feel better day to day, that goal really is driven by the desire to be able to get back on a lifting platform, or to be able to handle a barbell without any concerns or problems, or get back into running or something like that. And certainly within the NHS there are still that cohort of people that come through, but I think certainly the type of people that we tend to see, there are more things to consider. So typically I will see a population who might have more pre-existing health conditions, or they may be a little bit older, or the sort of the socio-economic factors that they are having to contend with each day tend to be a little bit more complex. So invariably they are a more challenging group to manage, and that then becomes compounded by the amount of time that I can spend with that person, as well as the frequency with which I can see that person as well. So there's certainly a lot more prioritization of what I can do in those sessions. If I've got half an hour to work with someone and I've got 5 or 6 different things that I need to go with, I know I'm not going to get through all of them, but if I can pick the low-hanging fruit that resonates with that person, then I'm more likely to get a successful outcome. But that's where we start to move into people's willingness to embrace change, or kind of discussing behavior change with them. And I think again on the constrained resources, it becomes very difficult to try and meet that person's expectations if they are skewed from where they've been before they've come to see us.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation of because there's 2 camps of it. It is 2 different populations. Probably the NHS side of things, like you were saying, may not potentially have that much of a training background, whereas usually especially in the like sort of the independent gyms, there's going to be a physio associated to that gym who are used to people who are doing the barbell lifts, strongman, bodybuilding, whatever it may be. And we've sort of kind of touching on the strength training side of things. Do you find that when people are coming to you, sometimes there's a case of oh well, I can't do this, so they've injured themselves, all right, well I can't squat, that's it, we're not going to be able to do that. Or there's the other end of the spectrum where people might be saying, oh well, I'll just go lighter, I just won't go as heavy this time and just see how it goes. How have you found, do you find that people say that, and how do you sort of put it across that, okay, well, we don't have to do nothing, we don't have to stop squatting altogether, and as well, right, well, I don't want you just going lighter, there's other things that we can put in place?
Yeah, I think there's always a trainable menu. I know Tony Gentlepool uses that term a lot, and it's something that I really liked when he put it out there. So, this makes perfect sense, because for everyone that comes in and sees me, whether we're dealing with a pain problem or a performance problem or a movement problem, there is always an entry point for that person to fit in at. Now, again, it depends whether that entry point is deemed acceptable relative to their expectations. But what we typically see and this is for everyone, this isn't just for, again, kind of barbell athletes, but you've got copers and you've got avoiders. And more often than not, the barbell athlete is the best coper that I've come across, because they will, yeah, as you say, that they will pivot by changing the exercise, changing the volume, changing the load. They will do everything they can to avoid not squatting, not deadlifting, not doing this particular lift. And I don't see these people when the pain starts. I see it 3 to 6 months down the line, when the trainable menu has narrowed and narrowed and narrowed, and they can't find a way out of it. So, you know, I think we've certainly got this concept of exercise progressions and regressions, and then you've got like what they call like a lateralization, so a Charlie Weingroff term of taking that side step but maintaining a training effect. And people are really good at doing that to a point, but then at some point, if it reaches that tipping point or that threshold where they think, right, I'm now in too much pain to be able to do this, or I'm spending 30 to 40 minutes to warm up to get under a bar, or I'm in pain for 3 days afterwards rather than just being a bit sore, that's where people tend to come through my door or are referred to me. And when you can go through a session with someone and you can make sure there's nothing serious going on, you can reassure them of that, and you can show them these ways of training that don't hurt, that do feel intense, and that could be a few different things depending on the situation. But if you're able to show that person that you can train and you found that entry point successfully, the rest of the process is relatively straightforward, because you've built that rapport by showing them, I'm not that healthcare professional that says you have this pain, therefore you cannot do that. Yeah. And that's where I think a lot of people run into trouble, and it's where physios and other rehab professionals get a bad name, because some people, if they don't know what they're doing with the population they're working with, the default thing to do is to rest and to avoid. And certainly there are times where that's important, but for me the most important thing is to try and find that training effect and maintain that as much as possible. And certainly we might regress that back 2 or 3 steps whilst we find the correct entry point. But managing someone's head and managing their mindset by doing that does you far better than saying, just don't deadlift for 6 weeks and then go back and just start light and build it up. You know, it's this very kind of wishy-washy approach where you've avoided the pain trigger or the pain cause for a period of time, which is great because it allows things to settle down and calm down. But what have you done to ensure that doesn't happen again in the future? And this is where, again, if you're working with a specific population, you need to have that skin in the game of being under a barbell and knowing what it feels like when it goes wrong, knowing what it feels like when it feels perfect. And if you can then talk in that language with someone, it becomes a lot easier to build that therapeutic relationship as well.
Yeah, definitely. I always liken it to, it's like if you were going to coach rugby or football, you've got to, or referee it or whatever. I think you've got to have some idea of, how the game is to get an understanding of it. And, I think that's the exact same when it comes to, the barbell lifts. Just a couple of things from what you were saying on there. Do you think, well, 2 things actually. Do you think that, when we're looking at the exercises, all right, well, if I do this is going to stop me getting back pain if you've started getting back pain, because especially with, social media and YouTube and all that sort of stuff, you see what's quite nice to see is a lot of people are doing like the McGill Big 3 in the gym. Oh, great. Well, this is going to stop me, getting back pain. Do you think that because just those snippets of information are out there of, do this exercise to stop back pain, do this exercise to manage knee pain? Do you think that people think that if they, go to a physio, that they're just going to be given those and they're trying to sort of I can't think what the word is, self-coach or self-treat themselves?
Yeah, I think one of my pet hates is the post on Instagram where it's, top 3 exercises for back pain, or do this to deal with your shoulder pain. And it falls into this category rather than it being like meaningful education. It's more of this like exertainment. So it's kind of just you scroll through your feed, you swipe a few times, and like, oh, that looks cool, I'll try that. And then you go and do it in the gym, and you're like, oh, well, why didn't this work? I'll try the next one and see what happens there. So I don't think there's such thing as a bad exercise, but you need to have a meaningful reason for selecting and programming that exercise. And I think with experience, you know, being in the gym and being a kind of a regular resistance trainer, I wouldn't say I fall into the category of being a strength athlete or a CrossFit athlete or anything like that. Yeah. But I think you learn how important programming is, and you learn how important it is to order and select exercises, and then you gauge your tempos, your volume, your intensity off of that. Whereas if you're just throwing 3 to 10 exercises at the wall and seeing what sticks for that person, then you've missed the boat, and you've not accurately assessed that person. So, you know, using your example of the McGill Big Three, you know, even Stu himself, he won't give those 3 exercises to everyone that comes through the door. And yet the perception on social media is that he will give those exercises to everyone that comes through the door. But actually there are reasons that will link him to those exercises within the assessment, which is typically 3 hours, because he has time to go through these things and listen to people and assess them. And those exercises are appropriate for a period of time. And based on the assessment findings, they've sort of form the basis for how you progress those things as time goes on. And again, that feeds into your trainable menu of, if I know these things are pain triggering, then I need to find alternative ways of moving or loading these activities. But if I know these other exercises are absolutely fine, then I can get after that with as much intensity as I want, and I can still feel like I'm training. Yeah. Because everyone should have the right to feel like, and you know, they should have the right to feel like an athlete in whatever athlete means in their mind. If you're taking someone and you're making them do very remedial, very low intensity work, and you don't have a very clear reason as to why you're doing that, then you're probably leaving potential progress on the table.
Yeah, especially with, and you know, it's interesting you say there that, you know, yes, there's people that'll be competing in powerlifting or, you know, competing in bodybuilding or strongman, but there's, you know, a large population, like what you said there, that just enjoy strength training, that you know, and they have a level of strength or a level of ability that I think sometimes you know, when you said there about giving exercises that aren't having a training effect, obviously the good thing, and you know, why probably a lot of people enjoy strength training, is that you can see progress on the bar. You can see actually you're getting better. And I think sometimes, like the, you know, McGill Big Three and other exercises, I think sometimes it's hard to judge whether you are making progress, if that kind of makes sense, because, you know, there's no sort of, you're not seeing weight on the bar, you're not seeing whether you're squatting deeper or, you know, or whatever it may be. And just sort of going on from that, I think there is more of a trend now that, you know, speaking with physios, you know, such as yourself, who have a background in training, to try and sort of blend the rehab and training worlds together. So how have you found you know, working with other coaches in terms of the programming side of things to blend together, and when sort of, you know, coaches have tried to step sort of into your world and vice versa, and what sort of like the best practices, you know, for that?
Yeah, so I think the sort of, you know, whether we call it interdisciplinary working or multidisciplinary working is absolutely critical, because I'm not a powerlifting coach. I'm not a this coach, that coach. I'm a therapist with an interest in these particular things, and I'm very lucky that the head coach, if you like, of the gym that I work at is a very well-known strength and conditioning coach. He is very good with what he does. I don't need to be that person, but if he's got someone who he can't coach out of pain, if it's just like a movement problem, if it's a programming error that's not writing itself as you change it and you give it time to settle, then he will very confidently hand off to me, in the knowledge and the confidence that I'm not there to say, well, you need to not train with this person for 6 weeks, because then it's impacting on his, his income ultimately, and it's then favoring my income when I see that person for 6 weeks. So I think being able to move away from this being a like a financially driven process, and making sure it remains a client-centered progress is really important. But again, I think the people you work with and the content you put out and the message you put out will draw people towards you, and you'll attract certain coaches and individuals. So I have I guess like a cohort of coaches that I would regularly refer out to, or I would have coaches that refer into me if they've got clients that they're not quite sure with things. And again, over the last year, that's the reach of that has increased because of COVID. But I think you need to know where your scope starts and finishes. And fundamentally, I think my scope probably finishes at the point where I've worked with someone through like a general physical preparation phase. And if we're then starting to move into more of the specific stuff, then that's where I hand off. Yeah. But again, as with everything, people get injured or people start suffering pain in the lead up to events, meets, comps, and things like that. And then actually we have to work a lot closer together, because we've got to appropriately manage the exposure of exercise that someone's placing themselves under, whilst maintaining that process of peaking over however long that is, whilst not worsening their pain. And that might be where I then move into more of a like a therapeutic role, where it becomes more about traditional physio stuff with manual techniques or pain relief strategies. But it also might then mean that we look at how we program everything around the stuff that's absolutely essential. So part of the process with working with anyone is saying what are the absolute non-negotiables that you will not budge on, because we can leave them there, but as long as you understand the consequences of leaving them there, then we're on the same page. What are you willing to give away in the short to medium term? So how much time, how many sets, how many days a week can we then work on this other stuff that I think will help you, worst case scenario, maintain where you're at. So if you feel you can carry this pain or carry this injury through to your competition, and you can then compete and we can deal with it afterwards, that's fine. But it all comes back to communication, I think. And as long as you're able to have that clear expectation with your client and with anyone associated with them, then everyone's on the same page, and you're all doing it for the same reason, but you also can't argue with each other because you've all made it very clear about the choices you've made.
Yeah, I think the key thing that you said there is working together in communication. I think there's maybe I don't know whether it's an old school train of thought, but right, you've got an injury, right, that's it, physio, you're with me, I'm just gonna look after you now. You're not gonna see your coach for however many weeks. But how I like to phrase it, if you like, is you've got a team. It sounds, from a client's point of view, it's going to sound a lot better that, right, you've got a team of people here that are essentially doing things within your best interest. I know with the barbell sports, it's everyone thinks it's an individual sport, but especially at the elite level, they're going to have a coach, a physio, everything in the background. And even for the the beginners or intermediate lifters, that I think there is a trend now that physios and coaches are speaking to each other and working together, rather than because I've had clients that have come to me and been like, oh, I've been following a six week rehab program. Oh, okay, so have you still been doing the some of the barbell movements in some capacity? Oh no, I've just been doing these. And it seems that it's a stop-start approach, rather than keeping that consistency of training and having some sort of training effect, like you mentioned. And one thing I want to touch on there, obviously we spoke about people leading up to a competition or a show or whatever it might be. In terms of the interventions that you're going to put in, does that differ depending on the on what part of the program that the lifter is in, and do you change your starting point, or is your starting point still the same, if that makes sense? Or do you have more progressed exercises or interventions depending on where they are within their program?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you have to weigh up, as you say, how far away from peaking they are versus what your assessment tells you. Because if I take a typical example, if I've got a 100 kilo plus power lifter who is 6 to 8 weeks out from competition, and they're saying I'm getting shoulder pain or I'm getting back pain, the reality is the intensities are only going one direction in that in that peaking phase, bar the the deload prior to the event. But how much do you want to intervene is guided by how much of a problem this is causing them. So typically what you might see, again, if you've got this heavy stiff power lifter and they are lacking they're lacking, I don't know, some shoulder internal rotation or hip flexion or something like that, there's certainly a lot of interventions you can put in place to try and help with that. But again, is that then going to reduce this necessary stiffness they have to squat 300 kilos or bench 200 kilos? So you have to weigh up, is this the best point in time to try and get this person moving more like a normal human being, rather than just this like sagittal plane monster? Or actually, is there some stuff that I can put in for this person that just makes them feel a bit better with the training they're doing? Because I can't think of too many people who get to their final sessions before they deload and they feel great. These are people that are tired and sore, and they're bored of training and they just want to get it over with by that point. But if I then go in there and say, right, well, you've got to do these 3 exercises for 3 rounds before you do every session, and then you've got to do this, then you've got to do this, they might feel a bit better when they're doing it. But ultimately, is that taking away from the goal of what they're trying to do of moving as much weight as possible? So that might be where, again, we look at more of the traditional kind of pain relieving strategies, whether it's manual therapy, whether it's using needles, whether it's using other strategies. But it's just trying to make that decision based on what that person's priority is.
Yeah.
If their goal is to compete and not feel like an absolute train wreck after they've done it, then actually you probably do say, look, you probably need to just spend a bit more time working on these particular strategies to create a bit more movement option or movement variability. Whereas if your goal is to set a national or an international record, then actually maybe the best thing that I can do in this process is patch you up as best as I can from session to session and give you some stuff that just keeps you treading water. Yeah. And I don't think that that's a bad conversation to have with people, because yes, the ultimate goal is always to get people out of pain, but we have to be upfront with people and say sometimes what you're doing is going to dilute the speed at which you can get better. Yeah. So maybe we carry you over the finish line here, and then for the next 6, 8, 12, 16 weeks of your off season, maybe that's the best time to approach some of these other things where we can not put a barbell in your hands for 4 to 6 weeks, and actually again we can get you feeling good and enjoying that training process again. Because again, as you said earlier, some people do just train for enjoyment, and I just enjoy the process of training and this process of physical expression, whereas other people do like to have that point in time where they can express their the most strength or the most fitness they've got. But some people don't have a desire to do that. So again, you've got to meet people where they want to be met, but you've still got to be true to what is realistically achievable in the time frame and the constraints that you're given.
Yeah, definitely. I had to smile to myself. Actually, it felt like you must have been a fly on a wall with my training up to a competition where you're fed up of training, and after every powerlifting competition I've done, I'm saying I want to do strongman. I want to do something different. I'm sick of doing powerlifting. But it is, it is true. You do get to that point where you just want to get the competition over, and then you've got time afterwards to do it. And I do agree with the, sometimes just maintaining and getting to that point where you think, right, we're gonna manage this pain a little bit more, or manage this injury, and then afterwards you've got a lot of time to work on things, because especially within the barbell sports, or strength sports, there's a massive chunk of time between competitions. I know maybe beginners might have maybe 4 or 5 competitions a year, but there's still a couple of months or weeks between competitions. And then as you sort of progress, especially at the higher level, they might only have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 competitions a year. So you've got a big chunk of time to address these things, whereas that one point in time, especially if everything is stuck to correctly and managed properly, then afterwards you can spend time focusing on these things. Would your thoughts on that differ? If I know we've spoken about the barbell sports, and this might be a little bit of a tangent, but in terms of maybe combat athletes, or people who are playing football or rugby, who are playing weekly, or stuff like that, would your thought process change, or would that still be the same concept of, right, we're going to get you through this competition point and then try and manage it? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think if we're talking more about the person that's sort of either in season or off season, then I think it does change the dialogue to a degree. But fundamentally, you're still looking at matching this load with with capacity equation that I think it was originally the FRC guys that put it out, where you've got, if load is greater than capacity, you create injury. If capacity is less than load, then it's rehab. When capacity is more than load, then it's injury, reduction or prevention or something like that. So that runs true for every person, irrespective of what they're doing in my mind. But again, it then becomes a balancing act of what's most important and what is the most optimal way of doing things. So if you've got someone who is competing on a weekly basis, and they are carrying something that they are able to kind of manage, and it's just there, I'd be far more, I guess, kind of forgiving with that person, or far less constrained on saying that you must not do this, or you must reduce your exposure to this, but let's try these other bits and pieces alongside that and see if that makes an initial change. So you're kind of adding things in to start with, and perhaps you're lateralizing rather than regressing an approach or a program, and that might be enough for for that person. Just by giving them a few bits and pieces, it might allow them to actually address a fundamental problem that they've got, and they don't then need to stop competing or stop training. But if you're adding in one thing and then the next thing and then in the next thing in like a measured and methodical manner, then you can always assess the outcome based on their subjective kind of feelings or KPIs. You could cross-reference that with your objective findings or your assessment findings, and then you can then have the discussion of saying, well, this didn't work. What about if we try that? If that didn't work, well, what if we try that? But this is when you then have to look at the bigger picture as well. So things like nutrition, rest, sleep, stress management, etc. Those can be more important for some individuals than actually my physio skill set. Yeah. If I've had a couple of examples of people who say, oh, I've had, I'm having this pain in my back, and it's like, okay, so let's go through a physio assessment. There's not really anything that comes up from that. And then you take a step back and say, okay, so are you getting enough sleep each night? Yeah, I sleep 6 to 8 hours a night consistently. I feel fresh when I wake up. Okay, we've ticked that box. Well, what does your program look like? And they say, well, on a Monday I'll do, on Monday I'll bench. On Tuesday I'll do some kind of pulling accessories. On Wednesday I have off. On Thursday I'll do heavy squats, and on Friday I'll do heavy deadlifts. And there's almost this kind of crickets chirping moment where you think, well, you've sandwiched the two most demanding things in your week in 2 consecutive days. And being comfortable to kind of poke and prod into people's lifestyle outside of their immediate problem is really important, because you can find these little things that could just be the light bulb that person needs. So, I've had people whose pain or symptoms will get significantly worse if they've gone through a high period of stress at work, or they've had like a run of really bad night's sleep and their pain is worse. So again, if you're looking at the sort of athlete that's regularly competing or someone who's in season, all of those things perhaps become more important because you've got that, that regular exposure to it. But again, is that then any different from the person that trains 4 or 5 days a week and, physically expresses themselves in the gym or competes with themselves in the gym? I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and especially because when it comes to, especially when you said there about right, well, how's sleep being, how's stress being, and everything like that. I think sometimes, and as well, do you know what, I didn't put anything down about that to cover, because sometimes the trainer thought is, oh well, it must be just because I'm what I'm doing in the gym. It must be just because I deadlifted this weight, it was too much and I hurt my back. Whereas actually, it is going to be it could be a build up of things. I know, just actually, a light bulb went off in my head there. A couple of years ago, I hurt my back. Why I remember it is because it was on the day of our staff Christmas do. So I spent the majority of it just sitting down. But I was thinking, how have I managed to hurt my back? It was a weight that I'd done before, wasn't anything, crazy. I wasn't even, it was in December, so there wasn't any competitions. And then thinking about it, as we were chatting through with the physio that was working there at the time, we got some new equipment. So I'd been carrying that in. Obviously, then still had a full day of sessions and all that sort of stuff, loading plates and doing everything like that. Thought, right, I'll try and get my session in, and it can be an overload of things and I think everything can be connected to one another. And I think sometimes people forget that it might not be that. It's like when we said at the start of, okay, you've hurt your back, it might be something else up or down the chain that might be causing that, as well as it might not have been that one thing in the gym that caused it. Because like what you mentioned, most people who are training in the gym, it might not be when the pain first started. People might be coming to see you when that pain has got so much that they're struggling with that. So I think that's a good way of thinking about it, and I think a lot more people are taking that a little bit more into account and realizing that sleep and rest and not having a crazy program where you're doing heavy deadlifts and then the next day coming straight in and doing squats, which is part of that whole process of educating people a little bit more of how they can manage these things and how they don't have to go right back to basics and start everything again. One thing when we were chatting about exercises on there and where they are in the program and all that sort of stuff, past when they've done the competition and we're focusing on, okay, right, we are actually now going to address these issues and spend a little bit of time of addressing these injuries. How far back from sort of like the main exercises that they're doing, which gives them a training stimulus, how far back would you maybe regress those exercises to still get the training stimulus that they want, but also trying to give them the exercises that they need to make sure that they're rehabbing? Because it is one of those phrases, give them most clients will want to do certain things, but you need to still throw in the things that they need to do. What's your sort of process of that?
I think it always depends. I think if we take the reference of a resistance trained individual of whatever type, I think you need to go back as far as you need to go back relative to, again, your assessment findings. So let's say, for example, you've got your powerlifting individual who has finished their, they've finished their comp, they're now looking at an off season of however long. You probably don't need to stray that far from the main lifts. It's just the method of loading them that you change. And again, maybe this isn't dissimilar to some of the, sort of West Side conjugate methods where, you'd still have a squat movement or your squat as your primary lift, but maybe instead of going for your low bar, heavily hip driven back squat, maybe you give that person a heel elevated safety bar squat, or even something like a hand supported squat or a Hatfield squat. So rather than you using this, this very kind of horizontal displacement driven squat, you ask that person to stay as upright as they can, and you make this a far more of like a vertically driven or knee dominant squat. And by virtue of where the load is with the safety bar being a bit more kind of anterior, by having someone perform a lot more of a kind of squatty looking squat, you're still maintaining a lot of training intensity and training stimulus, but you're just changing where that stress and where that stimulus is going. I don't think we need to take someone back to a like a heels elevated goblet squat. If this is someone who's squatting 200 to 300 kilos, giving them a 24 kilo kettlebell with heels elevated for a goblet squat, you've got to have a very, very good reason as to why you're doing that. And perhaps if pain is a real problem for that person, that's appropriate. But if you're just looking to restore some movement variability and use ranges of movement that person doesn't expose them to in lead up to a competition, then that can be extremely valuable. And I think one of the things that I've used probably more and more of in recent times, and this is whether we're talking about more of a rehab or like a post-comp restorative strategy, is lots more kind of unilateral loading, lots of kind of alternating movements to drive some of that rotation that you don't get when you have a barbell in your hands. But that may simply be the accessory work in a session. Yeah. Because you could still, for your off-season powerlifter, you could still do trap bar deadlift. You could do, like a neutral grip bench press. You could then do a safety bar squat. It still looks like like the big three in some capacity, but you're just giving those tissues that have been loaded and stressed for a number of weeks, and those movement patterns that have been ingrained, a bit of a break. And then actually some of those aches and pains will go away simply by changing where the load is applied to. And then as you start to move back towards your next competition cycle, you've got to make the decision, when do I need to go back and perform my specific lifts to, again, ingrain those movement patterns and feel comfortable with it, versus the stress that comes with those very specific and constrained movements.
Yeah, going back to what you said at the start, between sort of people in barbell sports who might pivot and try and be coping with the pain and that sort of stuff. And it's interesting you said about the safety bar and trap bar. I've put that in off-season programs just for variety's sake, because just doing squat, bench and deadlift can become a little bit monotonous sometimes, especially after you've had to build up to a competition which is quite specific. Sometimes people can say, because the majority of them will be copers, as you said, oh well, that's not a proper squat because it's a safety bar squat, like I need the bar across my back. That's not a proper deadlift because it's a trap bar deadlift. Do you think sometimes the thought process of that, from a client or an athlete's point of view, is that from the physio or the coach's point of view, that they're not programming enough sort of intensity, so they are getting a training stimulus? So they might think, okay, well, they've got a little bit of a dodgy shoulder, so we're not going to put them in a back squat. We're going to go to a safety squat, but then reducing the weight or the loading that they can do, rather than being like, yeah, we're doing a safety bar squat, this is the reason for it, let's get after it a little bit. This is still your training effect.
Yeah, you need to understand someone's emotional attachment to the exercises that they're already doing. And I think when you are quite distant from that sport or activity, it becomes very difficult for you to robustly justify why you're doing something. So, again, for me, if you put me in front of like a field athlete or like a football player, rugby player, there will be things that I can do that fit very generally with everything I do, but I couldn't tell you the intricacies of, well, you need to not do this, but you can do that instead. But when we're talking about barbell or strength athletes, they, the thing that often they resonate with, and for a lot of them, their identity on things like their social media feed is doing a bench with a heavy arch and lots of plates on the bar. It's giving yourself that low bar squat where your face looks like it's going to explode, and you're doing a deadlift again where you can see this physical exertion, and it's this real feat of physical expression. And if you just take those away without understanding how much it means to that person, then there probably is going to be some pushback. Whereas actually, if you can take the time to explain to that person and their coach, because sometimes it's coming from the coach rather than the client, if you change this for a short period of time, you're still training the same movement, you're still training, give or take, the same musculature. This will benefit you far more in the long term by having a bit of variety. So building that foundation, having that variability, allows you to build a taller peak. A pyramid can only be as tall as it is wide. Yeah. But I think if you have someone who doesn't want to give way on that because they have to bench or they have to squat or they have to deadlift with their preferred technique or bar, that's absolutely fine. But then you have to have the conversation about what the potential consequences of doing that are. Yeah. And this leads us back to, there are no good exercises, there are no bad exercises, but as long as you understand the consequences of your choices, or as long as you understand what happens when you do this, at least we're all on the same page. And yeah. If you're a private client paying me for my time and we've had that conversation, then my conscience is a lot more clear than if I've done everything that I possibly can and you're still having problems, then that will keep me up at night, and that will frustrate me. So I think you have to understand what it means to someone to be able to do a certain exercise or pursue a certain activity, and you need to be able to clearly explain why you're making the choice that you are. And if you can do that, most people are quite happy to give you the leeway with it. And more often than not, you'll then get your follow-up appointment, or you'll get a message from saying, actually, my back feels really good from not doing this stuff. Yeah. And again, you've then fed into this positive experience of them not having pain when they do a particular movement or exercise. And then from there, it builds that rapport, and then you can start to work back to doing the thing that they want to do.
Yeah, it was a good point that you said there about having the buy-in from it and making sure that they understand what is going on. And it kind of goes to the next thing of, I know we've spoken about blending the training together, and especially within sort of like the barbell lifts, it's usually more often than not the same areas that are going to be injured. And there's that train of thought that, well, not train of thought, it does happen, injuries will occur because either the weight's too heavy, they're just going, they're not recovering as well, or poor technique. And we've spoken about things to address when these injuries occur, and things that we can implement to make sure that we're managing pain. And when it comes down to injuries, pain and all that sort of stuff, does it come down to actually following a good training plan, or is it the rehab side of things that is going to prevent that, if that makes sense? I know injury prevention is another rabbit hole that we could probably go down, but does it boil down to, you know, just following a good training plan and being able to adapt and change with the variation in exercises, with managing pain, managing injuries, or is it, you know, right, we need to rehab and focus on this that is going to help lifters, you know, continue to train for, you know, forever?
Yeah, I think it's Mike Boyle that said that rehab is just good train. Yeah, I think it was good ACL rehab is just good training, and I think often trainers are in a very good position to effectively load manage their clients. I think what they when I receive referrals from other coaches, a lot of the time it's not for a specific injury that's just been sustained at one moment in time. It's more a case of, well, this thing is starting to creep up, it's becoming more of a problem, it's, you know, maybe you have that kind of that twinge, or that kind of, you know, quick episode of pain that then goes away afterwards. But I think for a lot of people, if you can be confident there's nothing serious going on, which comes down to a thorough assessment with a suitably qualified and informed therapist, then actually you can hand that back off to the coach a lot quicker. So the people that I work with who are being coached by someone else, I can go through the assessment and say, as my kind of tier one strategy, which might mean that I don't need to see you again afterwards if this is successful, is I would do this, change this, maybe don't do that for a little bit of time. But for the person who is not being coached and is almost self-directed in their exercise pursuits, I would be a lot more specific with what that person is having to do. But it also comes down again to the type of injury you're having. So if you're dealing with someone who's got some back pain that's gradually come on and it's becoming more of a problem as time goes on, then you can probably be a bit more agile and a bit more dynamic with how you program or how you advise that person to program. Whereas if you're dealing with someone who has had a specific injury or is post-surgery, then you're going to follow more of like a staged or progressive plan, where you're looking at, you know, restoring range of movement and then restoring strength, and then starting to work on kind of force absorption and then force production and things like that. So again, it always depends on the person that you're dealing with, but the situation that they're coming to you in as well.
Yeah, I think that was it's kind of from the first question I asked of, right, what's your definition of rehab? What does it what are we looking at? What do people think that rehab is? And, you know, that explanation there of, right, we're going to do an assessment, these are the things that we're going to do, point you in the right direction. I think that's a good roundup of, you know, rehab isn't just doing the McGill big three, just doing that for 6 weeks and then, right, your back pain is going to go, and then you can go back to training. You know, it is. That's why I wanted to ask that question at the end about, you know, good training of, you know, it's a continuum. You know, you can dip in and out of things and see where they're at, see where the client's at, if the pain's going away, if that intervention has worked, speaking with the coaches and, you know, playing around with the variations of exercises depending on where they are in a competition, which I think is, you know, that mindset of, oh no, well, I've got an injury, that means that I'm not going to be able to train. I think striking the right balance between that, because, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, everyone still wants to get in the gym and, you know, lift a little bit of weight or compete or do anything like that. No one wants to be, you know, having a setback and, you know, having something more severe, so they're going to struggle a little bit more. Whereas actually, you know, having that mindset is probably going to do more harm than good, rather than going and just being like, look, this is the injury, this is the niggle that I've got. I still want to train. but what can I do? Because I think sometimes there is that thought process of, oh well, I can't do this. Well, let's focus on what you can do, like what you mentioned there about what's your non-negotiables, and then what you can build on from there. So quite a lot of topics covered there, and a few tangents thrown in. But the last question that I like to ask for everyone listening, and from everything that we've chatted about there, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
I think if you've got an injury or a painful problem, then do your due diligence on finding the right person to work with. And as much as you are expected to be accountable to their process and their approach, they are accountable to you for making sure it meets the things that you want to do as well. So, rehab needs to be specific, and it needs to be progressive, and it needs to be relevant and engaging to that person that you're working with. So even if you have a fairly generic approach for certain things, that's fine, but the end goal is always whatever that person tells you the end goal is, and that's what you as a service provider are working towards.
Yeah, it is a good thing. It's from the athlete coming to you, or client coming to you. I think that's where sometimes people, from maybe a physio and a coach's point of view, sometimes forget it's not right. This is the end point that we're working towards. It's the person that's coming to you to say that. So yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on, Alex. I really enjoyed that, conversation and the topics covered. But for everyone listening who, might have any questions about anything that we've chatted about, want to see the content that you put out there, or maybe even, get in touch about working with you, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Yes, I wish I had time to write content at the moment, but so you can find me. I'm most active on Instagram, so it's just at rehab2robust, and then I have my own website, which is www.rehab2robust.co.uk. So again, I have a mix of in-person clients. I do remote working for anyone that wants to engage, or any queries or concerns people have got. So if there's anything anyone needs, just get in touch.
Awesome. Thanks again, Alex, for jumping on. I know, the world of rehab and physio is something that, I think is only going to benefit coaches and people involved in strength sports. And I think, especially everything that you've talked about and explained there, I think that's a good way to look at rehab, and is beneficial to me, so that I'm not thinking, oh God, I've got someone with an injury, I need to just give them banded exercises and goblet squats, whereas actually there's a lot more beneficial that that you can still get powerlifters, weightlifters, strongmen to where they want to be without sort of starting and stopping again. So really enjoyed that conversation. And I maybe wish I should have taken some notes about, all right, so actually I can do that there. But thanks again. Thanks to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.